and we'll be able to refer them to the recording too if they need it.
Mhm.
All right, well, let's kick this off tonight. Let me start by sharing my screen. Make sure I get this set up so you all are seeing the right thing. Oh, no, I'm not seeing the right thing. Hang on just one second.
May I introduce our legislative liaison, Andrea Wilkins?
There we go.
Thank you, Beth. I am not doing a good job of multitasking and trying to get the screen up and talk at the same time. Try to get. What I'm trying to do is get my notes version and.
Take your time.
And Kate, oh,
There we go. Well,
All right.
excellent.
Does that look okay, or are you guys seeing the
Beautiful.
notes version?
yeah.
Nope, we just see the slide.
Okay, perfect. Well, as Beth mentioned, I'm Andrea Wilkins. I'm the LWVCO Legislative Liaison. For those of you that don't know, my primary function with the League is to provide logistical and technical support to our Legislative Action Committee, which is a very exciting job. And there's always stuff going on, really year round, but the session is a particularly a special time of year, and we're about a month past adjournment at this point. So hopefully everybody, particularly our LAC members, have had a chance to catch their breath and kind of assess things as the dust has settled. But I just want to take a quick moment to mention Maud Norrell, Kathy Wilson, and Thalia Oster, who are the co-directors of Action and Advocacy that are my partners in heading up the LAC. Certainly, I would not be able to do the job effectively without them. You'll be hearing from all of them a little bit later this evening. Mainly you will be hearing from me. But I just because I have slides and all that, I don't want this to feel too stuffy. So if we could keep things conversational, feel free to jump in with questions or comments. And for the LAC members that are participating in the call tonight, if there are things that you want to add as I touch on your area, or if there's something that I don't mention that you would really like the participants to be aware of, please feel free to either raise your hand. Maybe emoji would work better because I don't really see a lot of you with my screen being shared, or just feel free to jump in. So with that, let's turn to the legislative wrap up for the 2024 session. I do want to point out what will be obvious is that this is in no way intended to be comprehensive. The LAC does a ton of work, follows a ton of bills, and this is really intended to very much be an overview. I will say that you can find much more extensive and in-depth information on the work of the LAC on the LWVCO website, on the legislative report page. But that being said, let's go ahead and jump into some highlights. As I mentioned, the session's been adjourned now for about a month. Official adjournment day was May 8th. In total, there were 705 bills that were considered this session, 525 of which were passed ultimately. This is a large number, but it is not a record. I will say though that it's nearing 100 more than what was introduced last year. I think last year stood at around 617. So we just saw a ton of legislation being introduced this year. All total, Governor Polis ended up vetoing 6 bills, including one that was supported by LWVCO. That was Senate Bill 150. And that was a bill that dealt with the processing of municipal solid waste. He had until June 7th 30 days to either sign legislation or veto it or have it take effect without signature. And so that date has passed. So that's kind of where we've landed on the number of vetoes this year. Sort of, a handful of them for sure, not as many as last year. So fewer vetoes seen this year, which probably ultimately is a good thing. The effective date for bills without a safety clause, meaning they aren't subject to the petition and referendum process, is August 7th. And I just realized I'm confusing myself here with all my numbers here. And then there were 7 referred measures that passed the session, kind of a mixture of constitutional amendments and then some statutory amendments that will appear on the November ballot. Okay, so a little bit about the work of the LIC specifically. Right now, we're standing at around 33 members that are covering about 12 plus issues. Really, we try and ensure that we've got as broad of coverage as we really need to, depending on the kind of legislation that we're seeing come out in a particular session. Of course, we don't take a position on anything that we don't have an organizational position on, but we do really cover a wide range of bills that follow the, really kind of run the gamut of our organizational positions. Our issue teams are continuing to grow. The LEC tends to work in teams around specific subject matter topics, which is great because that gives us a lot more capacity and coverage when it comes time to testify and that sort of thing. And we've got expanded coverage in some new areas and sort of a deeper bench, so to speak, on some other issues, which has been really exciting. We're seeing new coverage this year on children's issues. Though I will put in a plug for anyone who thinks they might want to do some work on children's issues. If you're at all interested in the LEC, we would very much encourage you to do that because it's really an area that saw a whole lot of bills this session and some really significant legislation. And we've got a great team behind this this issue area, but we really could use more coverage. So if anyone is considering potentially becoming a member of the LEC or taking on a new issue area, we would encourage you to think about children's issues. We've also got a new team on news access and literacy, which did a great job advocating on some open meetings bills and issues around government transparency. And we've also got some expanded coverage around justice and DEI issues. So we're really excited about that. This was another strong theme of the session that early on, we were really kind of feeling the pain of not having a lot of coverage around these issues, but we were really grateful to kind of assemble a strong team late in the session. So we were able to really kind of finish strong on JEDI issues. And we're really excited about having a good team headed into the 2025 session. But there really were a lot of standalone bills that kind of focused on JEDI issues. We often see JEDI components or JEDI implications in bills that kind of fall under our other topic areas. But there was a lot of legislation this year that really was, at its core, a JEDI bill. So it's great to have a team, really focused in on that area specifically. The LAC issued action alerts on 11 bills this session, which resulted in over 6,400 member contacts to legislators and elected officials. So we really have all of you to thank and our broader membership for really, being very responsive to those action alerts, and answering the call to really let our policymakers know about league priorities, what's important to us as an organization, how things are impacting your community, and really let them know what we would like to see them do with these 11 bills that were the subject of an action alert this session. In total, the LAC followed 145 bills, which I do think is a little bit more than what we've historically done, at least during my time with the league, which dates back several years now. I think typically we've kind of landed around 100, maybe 120. But I think as our team has expanded within the LAC, we're really seeing the ability to cover more legislation and more areas, more subject matter areas. So we were really very active in the scope of legislation that we were covering, having taken a support or opposed stance on 124 of those bills. So the other 19 or so, or 20, 21, whatever it is, those are bills that kind of fell into the monitor category. So we were keeping an eye on them, but we weren't necessarily assigning, a real specific stance to them or potentially providing testimony. That was, more how we handled those 124. And 93 of those 124 bills were decided in alignment with the LWVCO stance that we had voted on. So I think that's a pretty good track record. We are pleased with that. Certainly we can't take all the credit for it because, with most bills, we are acting in coalition. So we're certainly adding our voice to the broader community, the broader stakeholder community around these bills, but nonetheless, a good number. And Thalia, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah.
Please.
Just a quick question. Do you know, Andrea, whether this, it looks like about 75% of the bills that we took a stance on were decided in alignment with our position. Do you know historically whether that's about the same, or did we have less influence this year or more influence this year?
I think it's low.
I think it's lower. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's a bit lower. And I think that some of it is that we're following more bills. So I think we're seeing, maybe more that are not going our way. We within our positions, as all the LAC members will know, we do sometimes take an amend stance. And so in those instances, we had a few bills where we were seeking a specific amendment, and I think there was some success as far as, seeing the amended version of the legislation come into being, but ultimately the bill didn't pass. So, I think that we're exerting influence in a variety of ways. But in general, yes, that's a little bit lower than where I think we've been in the past.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, and kind of along that topic, kind of looking to where we're falling in terms of success rate based specifically on action alerts. This was a question that I know I have received, and I think others have been asked by our broader membership for sort of an update on what the outcome of the bills were that were subject of an action alert. And so you can see here we've got a little bit of a mixed bag. Some were postponed indefinitely, which for those that aren't familiar with that term, it's basically meaning the bill is effectively killed. It's getting postponed, no further action, and it's effectively dead for the session. You've got others where you can see they made it through the process, were signed by the governor and became law. So that's great. That's the outcome we want to see. And then in a couple of instances, we were in the frustrating position of the bill not receiving any sort of final action before the end of the session. That was true in the case of House Bill 1075, which was would have required a study of implementation of a universal healthcare payment system in Colorado. And then we saw that again on House Bill 1168, which dealt with equal access to public meetings. You'll see in the parentheses where I've got our position. So, in instances of a support, which I think is the case with all of these, except for the very last one, we wanted to see those become law. But, we're seeing it in some cases, we're not seeing it in others. In the case of Senate Bill 157, the Colorado Open Meeting Law for the General Assembly, that is a bill that we opposed. It passed. We issued an action alert requesting outreach to the governor's office that he veto that bill. Unfortunately, that did not happen. It has been signed and has become law. Kathy and Maude, please jump in.
Yeah, I just want to say the first one, SB 49, that one was postponed indefinitely, but it came back to life in a slightly different form at the end of the session. The first bill, 49, covered public school libraries as well as public libraries. The public school element of it is what ran into a bunch of problems. But when they brought it back as SB 216, it passed, and it passed really nicely. And what it does is protect public school library staff and volunteers from the attacks on the collection integrity at the libraries that have been seen in other states. So it created guidelines for reconsiderations that included really clear JEDI delineations. So we'll see next year if they, I know Senator Cutter was thinking about trying to bring back the public school element of this next year. So we'll see if she does that.
And it looks like we don't have a great batting average, but we often will ask for an action alert when a bill is important and it looks like it's teetering. So we're going after the really sick, the bills that are a bit on life support, and some of them still don't make it despite the best efforts of league members.
But 750 is still a great batting average. Just saying.
Overall, this is just on the action alerts.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Maude. I'm glad you brought that up. And it was something I wanted to mention to provide a little more context about, how we choose to issue action alerts. Obviously, things that are, a really high priority for us, are sometimes the subject of an action alert. But as Maude mentioned, probably more often than not, it's bills that are important to us that are running into trouble. And we think that there needs to be a push, whether that's to the membership of the General Assembly broadly, or sometimes it's really kind of targeting, maybe just a couple of legislators. I think that's when the beauty of our local league network really shines, because, if we've got a bill, which, happens all the time, where, legislators from a certain area aren't really on board with it, it's great to be able to reach into our local league network, have them reach out to legislators that are potentially their representative, or maybe from neighboring communities, to really let them know that this is the reason we're supporting this bill. This is why we think it's important for our community. So it's fantastic that you all have been responsive to these, and just really kind of reinforcing the point that bills that become the subject of an action alert are things that they're bills that we've identified as, really needing that extra push. So your calls and outreach are very, very important. Thalia, please go ahead.
Just to put a finer point on that discussion about how oftentimes action alerts are shared with our members when bills are in trouble towards the end of the session. there were a whole bunch of bills just stuck in appropriations, just waiting to see where the money was gonna, be parceled out. And so all of LAC, chose a bill or two in their issue area that we thought if it wasn't for the money involved, it might pass more easily. So there was a big push at the end of the session just to try and get some of our favorite bills out of appropriations, unstuck in that financial quagmire.
Yeah, that is really a great point. And it really calls to mind for me, Senate Bill 59, the Children's Behavioral Statewide System of Care, which was an attempt to really expand mental health supports to young people, which we know is, really becoming a crisis issue. It's something that, we were very much in favor of seeing done, but it also came with an extremely high fiscal note. So that really made for a lot of challenges. We were very supportive of the concept, but we knew from the start that this bill was pretty likely to not pass just because of the costs that would be associated with its implementation. I think that's really, I think to me, that kind of points to another, I don't know if theme is quite the right word, but definitely a factor this session. We've come off of, really kind of a wild ride over the last few years about where we are fiscally, with COVID hitting, shutdowns occurring, unemployment skyrocketing, there was obviously huge concern about, a recession, what that was going to do to the economy. Then we had a very large infusion of federal money coming in, which actually put the state in a position of having, in some instances, more money than it knew how to spend. And that money has since been used. It is essentially gone. And so now we're back to what could be considered more normal times. And with that, we're seeing much more hesitation to sign on to big investments, particularly things that require multi-year ongoing investments. So as Thalia mentioned, we saw a lot of bills really get held up in appropriations. Some were just slowed down, some never made it out of appropriations. So the fiscal picture was definitely something that played into a bill's ability to pass this session. So just a little more context there about kind of the environment that we were working in, and some of the bills that were picked for being the subject of an action alert. All right, now I want to focus on some of the focus areas for the 2024 session, not just for us as an organization, though these some of the topics that you'll see certainly fit, but the legislature as a whole. Some of the big areas that we see the most legislation in year after year after year are some of the topics that you see here: education, healthcare, revenue. These are always areas that just see tons and tons of bills. And fortunately, they're also the areas that our action and advocacy co-directors are, part of the team and heading up. So I definitely wanted to make mention of some of the themes that we saw in each of these areas, and then I will turn it over to the three of them to say a little bit more about each. But in terms of education, we saw, I believe it was around 70 bills introduced this session. The school finance formula, school funding, is always a really contentious issue in Colorado. It's an area of a lot of frustration because I think, as many of you know, we haven't funded education at the level that's constitutionally required in many, many years now. I think about 15 years. And so, when we're looking to significant activity in education, one of the things that I think is really top of list for bills in this area was the elimination of the budget stabilization factor, which is it's like a mechanism that the legislature has used for some time now as kind of a workaround to basically not fully fund education. And it's kind of resulted in this running debt that over the last several years, there's been a very concerted effort to try and chip away at. And this was the year where that was finally the debt owed essentially was eliminated. So that was a huge accomplishment that's been a few years in the making. It doesn't get us to where we need to be in terms of the funding levels for our public schools. And I'm sure Kathy can say more about that. But I will say that it is an accomplishment that we've gotten to the point where we're not continuing to rack up the debt owed to public education. So that was exciting. The other thing was there was a bill that's passed which established a new public finance formula for school financing that really is placing more of a priority on equity. And in doing so, it's providing essentially more funding for students that live in poverty, English language learners, special education students, and then funding for rural districts. So that is something that, I think this is, I think, a bill that was, sort of received differently depending on, the stakeholder group in question. But overall, there's been an effort to reform the school finance formula and make it more equitable for quite some time. So, this is definitely something that we see as a positive and a step in the right direction. In terms of revenue, we're seeing kind of a similar number of bills being introduced, 70 plus bills. Here we saw a really strong focus on bills that were creating tax credits for various things. There was a whole bunch of them this session, and Maude, I think, will touch more on this, but really kind of one of the things behind this is that, by implementing more tax credits, the General Assembly is able to hold more funding apart from the Tabor surplus that would otherwise be refunded back to taxpayers for the purposes of freeing up more money for critical services. So it's definitely sort of a symptom of living with Tabor, but really kind of it's become a tool in Colorado for ensuring that we have enough funding for our critical programs and services. And then lastly, turning to healthcare and reproductive healthcare, overall, we're seeing, somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 bills introduced in this area. The LAC team monitored a whole bunch of legislation here, including bills dealing with substance use disorders, expanded midwife access, medical aid in dying, and studies on both gender affirming care and universal health care. So I will leave the details of all of that for Thalia to highlight. But one thing I do want to mention, a little bit apart from the legislative end of things, but also a very important component of our work around healthcare and our advocacy here is ballot initiative 889, which is the right, basically enshrining the right to abortion in the Constitution, will appear on the November ballot in no small part thanks to the League, who all of you were just amazing in your signature gathering efforts that really helped ensure that that ballot measure will appear as a question on the ballot. So very, very exciting there, and certainly an extremely important point or important part of our healthcare advocacy this session. So with that, I will stop talking and I will turn it over to Kathy to maybe say a little bit about education.
Hey, just the one thing about funding is with the BS factor being the budget stabilization factor being resolved, it brings us to 1989 funding levels, considering inflation. So we have a ways to go to work on that. But in addition to the pre-K-12 school funding increases, the 2024 legislative session included 3 bills that have become law, which consider school health and safety of teachers, staff, and students in a variety of approaches. So one bill, HB 1136, promotes healthier and responsible social media use by students. This bill, this law now requires the Colorado Department of Education to maintain a free resource bank of program materials in English and Spanish for teachers and for parents. That includes information on the effects of social media used on brain development, how to mitigate the risks, and how to maintain well-being while interacting online in online environments. Schools also must add this information to their student wellness programs. Another law, which was 1320, created the Educator School Safety Task Force to study issues related to the safety and well-being of public school staff. The task force will determine the relationships among student behaviors in disruptive learning environments and the declining number of special education professionals, widespread staff shortages, class sizes, and caseloads. They're also going to be looking at aggressive student behaviors toward educators, and finally, will consider how insufficient school funding and the lack of wraparound services offered in schools because of that, and resource inequity in general affects disruptive learning environments. The third law in this area is SB 162, and it promotes best practices for preventing discrimination in schools by requiring the Colorado Department of Education to provide public schools with free training for all public school employees. That includes like the janitors and the bus drivers, in addition to teachers and other staff. And it's training in recognizing discrimination or harassment in schools, and then applying trauma-informed, age-appropriate responses. All of the employees will have retraining every 3 years to recognize signs of grooming and sexual abuse, and distinguishing between harassment and bullying. Now, in another area, a bill, House Bill 1363, that we did support but didn't pass, was titled the Charter Schools Accountability. To give you a little background, in 2016, the School Finance Act relaxed the transparency and accountability measures for charter schools and created an uneven playing field for traditional public schools. So this 2024 Charter School Accountability Bill, if it had passed, would have reinstated accountability in several areas and provided transparent data to determine if equity is being achieved among traditional public schools, the districts, and the institute charter schools, each of which are publicly funded. We anticipate reduced form of this bill because it was a very complex bill. And we're hoping that it will be reintroduced in the 2025 session. The final bill that I want to mention was generated by the Colorado Youth Advisory Council Committee. And this is a group of just amazing 14 to 18-year-olds who created this legislation. They introduced the non-legal name changes bill, which was House Bill 1039, that is now law. It requires public schools to address and refer to a student using the name that the student prefers, regardless of whether the preferred name is different from the student's legal name. The preferred name is to be used without requiring a court-ordered name change, a gender change, or a change to official school records. And I just eliminated what I had up here. And if an important thing to remember is a school's refusal to use the student's preferred name is to be considered an actionable form of discrimination. The last thing that I would like to mention is I want you all to be a public school voter. So on these ballot initiatives that are coming around, please do not sign number 142, which is the parent notification of gender incongruence, or 160, which is the public athletic programs for minors. Both of these are anti-trans initiatives. Please don't sign them if you're asked to sign them. The other two, right now, to avoid a revenue bills, and I can let Maud, if she'd like to, talk a little bit about this one. And that's revenue initiative 176 and 178. Those are really aimed at defunding the schools, or at least that's a side effect of them. And then remember to vote no on 138, which is the school choice in education that really would defund public schools badly. Anyway, I think
Another bill I have to mention that the education people are, an initiative that the education people are worried about is 250, wait a minute, 252. It's a rebrucing provision. It would mean almost every single school district has debruced, and it would undo or force them to revote on debrucing.
Right.
I
Yeah,
wanna add-
and we are opposing that one. There'll be a new those of you, I hope, are looking at your weekly emails from the State League, and we have a little graphic most weeks of, it's almost always don't sign. I think there may be one or two that we're going to say, yes, we like that, but mostly it's don't sign the turkeys on the list, including that one. It's even worse than what Evie said. So
Maud, I want to add one thing, and it's something that I learned yesterday in one of our partner organizations, Great Education Colorado. And if you want to see how bad things can get for the state, look at what's happening in Arizona right now because of vouchers. It was mind-blowing to hear last night what's happening. So I'm sure we'll be talking more about that. So I'll hand it off to you, Maud.
okay, thank you, Kathy. As Andrea said, 2024 was the year of tax credits. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights, TABOR, limits the amount of money that the state can spend. As Evie said, most school districts have asked their voters, and their voters have said yes, to take those shackles off. But statewide voters say, oh, I like my TABOR refund check. No, I don't want to take off the shackles. So any revenue over this TABOR cap, the state can't spend on schools or healthcare or childcare or anything else that helps Coloradans. But this session, the state legislature passed over 20 bills creating new tax credits and or expanding existing ones, because the last several years we've had record-breaking Tabor surpluses. That's the revenue that state couldn't spend and had to refund, of $1 or $2 or $3 billion that went back out to taxpayers. So the legislature is ambushing this money before it gets into state coffers by giving tax credits, very directed tax credits, almost $1 billion in tax credits to, or up to $1 billion, almost $1 billion in tax credits, mostly to middle to low income families with children. And the two biggest are very thoughtful. If revenue drops, instead of those tax credits eating into what the state can spend, the tax credits shrink. And therefore they protect the spending that we already do directly in the state. I mean, I can go into details on revenue bills, but I really don't want to hear a lot of snoring from everybody. So I'm happy to take questions if anybody has more questions.
Maude,
Yes.
are you expecting a lawsuit when it comes to that, the debrucing stuff? I could see a lawsuit coming out of that, changing, taking that Tabor money. Has anybody suggested that? I mean, is there a rumor?
Not that I haven't heard anything. I mean, we have lots of tax credits already. We have an earned income tax credit. We have a child tax credit. We have a child care credit. There was one large new credit created for families with kids. But some of it is just expanding existing tax credits that are already on the books. I mean, there's a whole report called Tax Expenditure Report of all the money we essentially spend by giving tax credits to people for putting conservation easements on their land, people who have mortgages, pay interest on mortgages on their homes, a film tax credit. So, and those have stood for years. And it's not directly tied to the revenue, it's tied to the revenue forecast. And Evie, I was being dramatic, but they do reduce the Tabor rebates. And we supported those two biggest tax credit bills. We support a Robin Hood tax credit, a tax system that's progressive, that takes a larger share of income from those who have the most and a smaller share from those who have the least. And yes, we would absolutely support and have supported getting rid of Tabor. It just, at this point, that's what we have. Other questions? Okay, Thalia, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Maude. I'll try and be pretty quick here since we're getting close to 8 o'clock, but like Andrea said, our healthcare issue area group studied all 90 healthcare bills. We took a position on several dozen of them. Most importantly, there was much focus given to House Bill 1075, Analysis of Universal Healthcare Payment System, which was, so we, the league worked along with a
Celia,
couple
Celia, you're-
dozen other organizations in a coalition trying to get this passed. It was introduced first day of session.
Celia,
Oh,
your sound is breaking
Am I all
up.
right?
Do you want to
Am I,
kill your
can you hear
video?
me? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that, I turned my
Yeah.
video off. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So anyway, it was introduced the very first day of session. It made it all through both houses, all the committees, appropriations, and everyone was waiting with bated breath on that very last day of session. And it never came up for a vote in the full Senate. So that was a huge loss for the healthcare interests in the state, but I think we'll probably try again next year. Let's see. We also took support positions on bills relating to substance use disorder. There were 4 bills that came out of the Opioid and Substance Abuse Study Committee from last year, 2 from the House and 2 from the Senate, that dealt with prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery. And they all were signed by the governor. Taken together, this will bring innovative practices and medication-assisted treatment to citizens of Colorado. And also, the treatment bill will have substantial federal matching funds in the future, which is pretty awesome. Let's see. We also dealt with a bill that made it easier to accomplish medical aid in dying or physician-assisted death. The governor signed this one also, and this we already had a pretty strong statute about physician-assisted death, but this bill took the waiting period from the request from 15 days to 48 hours, and also allowed health providers to waive the 48-hour requirement if it was unlikely that the patient might not live that long. Also included nurse practitioners, gave them the same authority as attending physicians. It also allowed non-Coloradan residents to take advantage of this bill as well, which was, I think, pretty wonderful. What else? There was also an expansion of midwife access, and there were also a couple of studies on the universal health care, which failed, also gender affirming care. There was a study that was to address access to gender affirming care in different areas of the state that failed. Okay, so now reproductive health care. Obviously, ballot initiative 89 took most of our efforts, and which will ballot so we can all make sure abortion is protected within our state constitution. But as usual, there's always a couple of bills that are anti-abortion, and of course we took a strong opposition to them. One would have defined personhood as beginning at conception, and another would have required physicians and other healthcare professionals to provide information to patients on medication abortion reversal, which is a practice that is not substantiated by data or healthcare studies, but where if someone takes the first abortion pill and then has second thoughts, these groups say that if you take a different pill that I think has a large amount of progesterone in it, that you could reverse the abortion process. But because the American Medical Association and associations of obstetricians and gynecologists are vociferously against this practice. We strongly opposed it, and that one failed also. And I think that's it for me. Any questions from anyone? All right, cool.
All right, well, thank you all. I appreciate the added detail there. Let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. That's got a couple of other areas highlighted that I think fall into the focus area category for 2024, as well as things that were important to us as an organization. Housing and transit related bills, particularly bills that are talking about co-locating housing or locating housing near transit, are definitely a priority for the General Assembly this session. It's actually been true for a couple of years now. We've seen, I guess I'll back up and say that there are certainly fluctuations in, the number of bills that we'll see in a particular area from one year to the next. As new members come into the General Assembly and, they focus on different priorities. So, some years you'll have a whole host of bills in one area, next year, maybe not as many. Housing has been an area that we've really seen a lot of legislation for at least the last couple of years, really in direct response to the fact that affordable housing in Colorado has reached crisis levels throughout the state. Homelessness has been on the rise, trying to direct more supports to individuals that are either experiencing homelessness or at risk of it has been a big focus. And then, measures that look to both expand the stock of affordable housing as well as provide more renter protections. So it's been a very broad range of bills that we've seen in this area. And not surprisingly, given the amount of legislation introduced by the General Assembly, that a high number of bills were also followed by our housing team within LAC. We've got a really great team that has dug deep into the various housing issues. And in total, they followed 45 bills. We, as I mentioned, they really kind of ran the gamut in, the types of issues they were focusing on under that housing umbrella, looking at things like the elimination of residential occupancy limits with exceptions in place related to health and safety concerns. But the idea being that, more unrelated adults could be living, within the same residence. We saw legislation passed that allowed for accessory dwelling units in some jurisdictions. And then we also saw expansion of housing in transit-oriented communities. There's been a push to really kind of increase not only the affordable housing stock, but increase density in some areas as a way of, ensuring that housing is being built near services that will allow people to both access transit, but, have supports in place to be able to access jobs and that sort of thing. So a lot of variation, and that's just the tip of the iceberg as far as the type of housing legislation that was worked on by our team within LAC. But it kind of gives you a sense of the wide range of issues that were covered under that larger umbrella. Another area that saw a lot of legislation this year was the natural resources category. We have a really large LAC team that focuses on natural resources issues. And within that, there's a lot of subtopics that include air quality, water, energy, climate concerns. So again, this is a very broad, often very technical issue area to be focused on. And our LAC members followed, I believe, around 20 bills in this area this session. They dealt with things such as distributed renewable energy generation, cumulative impacts on public health and the environment from air pollution emissions, and dredge and fill operations and wetlands protection. So again, you can really see kind of a broad range of topics falling under that larger natural resources umbrella. And I also want to mention voting in elections. We saw less legislation in this area, but I did want to make mention of the bills that the team followed this year. A lot of focus was on legislation dealing with election integrity, voting by electors confined in jails or detention centers. I know there's been a lot of work within some of our local leagues to get into the jails, make sure that individuals that are involved in the justice system have got information on their ability to vote, that they know how to exercise that right, and then actually have the ability to vote. So that was a bill that we were excited to see passed. And then we also supported a bill that was focused on promoting ballot access for candidates with disabilities. So kind of gives you a flavor of some of the things that our team there was focused on. Again, you know, these highlights that I'm giving are in no way comprehensive. There was a lot of gun violence prevention legislation introduced this session that we followed, advocating on a lot of specific bills there. I mentioned earlier a lot of children's issues, some justice systems bills, and I'm sure many things that you know, I'm leaving off the list, but just you know, really kind of wanting to give you you know, sort of a broad overview of you know, the wide range of things that LAC is working on. And I guess to that point, I really would encourage everybody to check out the full list of bills that were followed by the LAC during the 2024 session. We've got a master bill list on our legislative report page within the website that will give you a quick glance at every bill that we followed in any sense this session, whether it was monitoring or taking a specific stance on that bill. We also have bill lists that are focused on our various subject matter categories that you can look at. We've got a bill list that focuses on bills, exclusively on bills that we either strongly supported or strongly opposed. So those bills that we were very passionate about. And all that can be found on the webpage via the link that you see in the slides here. I also want to mention that the LAC members have done a fantastic job basically compiling a more extensive written form of the information that we're giving you tonight. So you'll be able to access that legislative summary that we produce every year at the end of the session. We're in the process of putting the final touches on that, and that will be posted shortly after you know, we have a final version. Of course, you can always find information on the ballot issues. Legislative Action Committee members are very busy. We're really transitioning now from you know, looking at you know, all the legislation that's coming out, advocating on specific bills, to now analyzing the various initiatives that are coming up and getting out information on our position on those measures that have been approved for circulation. So as you go about your life and you come upon signature collectors, you know, our goal is to basically equip everyone with information on what our stance is on those bills. So I'm taking us to the wrong slide. So you can go ahead and you know, hopefully make a decision to sign or not sign in an informed way. And then of course we've got examples of member testimony on specific bills and LAC member articles relating to you know, a lot of recent policy priorities that you can find on that page as well. Maude, please jump in.
Oh, thanks. There were over 700 bills introduced. There were over last session, there were over 300 initiatives that went to the Secretary of State's title board. Not all of those will be on the street. We'll have people out collecting signatures, but there are a lot out there. And as Andrea said, the Legislative Action Committee is nose to grindstone. Tony Larson is coordinating that. Thank you, Tony, it's a huge job. And if you get stopped at the grocery store and people say, sign this to cut your property taxes, don't, because it will defund your local government and your schools. There was property tax reform passed this session. They have been band-aiding and kicking the can and just doing temporary things. And this was a permanent effect that will restrict the growth rate of property taxes. It will protect schools, but it will also reduce the rate of growth of our property tax bills. Please don't sign the other stuff that people ask you to, those initiatives.
Thank you,
Kathy.
Maude. Please jump in, Kathy.
And I just want to add one other thing that the Legislative Action Committee is involved in, and that's the interim committees that are coming up now in the summer and the fall. So these are special committees for particular areas. The one that I mentioned earlier, the Colorado Advisory Committee, is an interim committee. So I will be listening to the workings of that one, which is fabulous. But they have a wide range. If you're interested in wildfires, there's one on wildfires. So I mean, there's a whole list that you can look at if you go to the General Assembly webpage and go to committees and scroll down, you'll get to the interim committees.
Thanks for bringing that up, Kathy. The other thing that we do focus on during the interim that may be of interest to non-LAC members as well is the Joint Budget Committee proceedings. Joint Budget Committee is a year-round committee, not an interim committee, but there is a lot of meetings and work that takes place by that committee during the interim, and it's a good way to really kind of get a read on the fiscal picture and some of the funding priorities, and kind of get an early preview of some of the thought that's going into the ultimate development of the budget that the committee is responsible for, that appears every March. So a lot of stuff to tune into over the interim. I did a quick scroll of the chat to see if there are any questions there. I think the only one I see is, I know someone mentioned they weren't quite sure what JEDI stood for. By that acronym, we mean justice, equality, diversity,
Inclusion.
And it's actually equity over
equity.
equality.
Equity. Thank you, Beth. As I was saying it, something felt wrong. Yes. So, we try and make a point of always calling out what we see to be JEDI impacts in the bills that we're following in within another subject area, like housing. As you can imagine, it's got a lot of JEDI considerations or impacts. Honestly, most legislation does to one extent or another. But as I mentioned, we did see some bills that were really focused just on, the equity issue in general. There was a racial equity study, the bill that passed the session that, is looking to sort of identify the various ways that state policy has, contributed to systemic racism for Black Coloradans, Black populations. There are some things that really kind of just fall into that category in and of itself, but most are embedded elsewhere. And we do try and call that out into our bill summaries that you'll find in our bill list. So, just something to note there as well. But with that, I know that we are a little past the hour now. So we should probably let you all go. But please know that, you know, if there's anything that we've touched on tonight, or if you've got questions about other LAC activity that we didn't talk about in the presentation, please feel free to get in touch with any of the four of us, Beth, of course, or we can always direct you to the LAC lobbyist that deals with an issue that you may have a question on. So please reach out if you've got any questions. And otherwise, I hope everyone's enjoying their summer, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate it. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Good night.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.